Good afternoon, everyone. So next up, we have another deep dive with CLAIR and giving us information that we need to know with the GIA update. We have Takahashi-san and Matt Gillum from CLAIR. So the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving us the chance to talk to you about information for CLAIR. First, I'm Mari Takahashi from Sakai Town in Ibaraki Prefecture. I'm in charge of Western JETAA USA Chapter. So let's start for the GIA process and schedule for this fiscal year, because we've already completed the application and notificate process. I would like to just review the change of usage and final reporting information. This information was announced in the June GIA webinar, and we have not made any changes to it. Regarding reporting activities this fiscal year, the deadline will be February 17th next year. We will check the document and proof of payment, then issue a final determination of the GIA amount to each chapter. Again, the deadline will be February 17th, 2023. If you want to make any change in your original plan, especially if you add event to your original plan after you receive the decision notice, you need to submit the usage change form. Next, after decision notice and prepayment, submit change requests as needed. If the cost will be higher than the amount requested, or if the use of the funds will change, please be sure to contact us prior to the event. Let me explain especially Form 4, the usage change procedure. First of all, please let me explain further about when chapter need to apply for usage change. As I mentioned, you need it when chapter decided to make any changes, especially when you want to add activities that are not written in your original plan, or you are decided to cancel activities. You also need it when you request more than the decided GIA amount in your decision notice, which we send out, or have a significant decrease in cost. You must also submit this form if you change the use of your GIA. If you have made a big change since you were approved and did not submit a change request, the change may not be approved. We use also all of our grant budget, but if there are some chapters with excess funds, we want to try to redistribute this to other chapters that are able to make good use to the money. We also allow you to submit a usage changes after the events are held. However, you might run the risk of not being able to get GIA for the event because, for example, the event might not meet CLAIR requirement. We highly recommend that you submit the applications or at least discuss them with us in advance. Normal GIA may not cover expenses such as membership fees for organization and participation fee for receptions, and especially event which will be held in March 2023. But we will decide if we can approve fund or not after checking the details. Please feel free to ask us beforehand about which will be covered or not, and what you can purchase or not, if you are not sure. Next, let me give you some example for expenses that cannot be covered by normal GIA. As I told you, transportation fees to attend NatCon or CanCon will be covered by normal GIA, but personal spending for the conference, for example, omiyage and personal meal, will not be covered by any GIA. There is no per diem. Also, accommodation fee for NatCon or CanCon shouldn't be included in each chapter's GIA application. This is handled separately. Additionally, donation to other organizations and expenses which are covered by grant or budget from other organizations will not be covered either. As for virtual events, I guess you hold some virtual fun events. However, normal GIA does not cover game app fee for online networking event. Final reporting. As a reminder, in the case of activity report Form 6, if a physical receipt is issued, please send it to our office along with the original activity report by the deadline. Next, proof of payment. We accept receipt, invoice with a paid stamp or quote invoice with bank statement showing payment as the proof of payment. However, please remind us that we will never accept handwritten receipts. Also, these days, if you place an order over the internet, you may only receive a receipt online. So, if you only have any online receipt, please submit the PDF or PDF of the email or other documents that confirm that the payment has been made. Please note that you need a digital receipt, not a confirmation for ordering. The last thing is honorisms. As for these, a canceled check copy is not enough proof of payment. Please get a receipt for the person who received the honoris. With this signature or get check deposit data from your bank. Ideally, you should have a pre-printed receipt ready for the person to sign. Note that an image of a photocopy of a check alone is not accessible. Please note that many chapters submit the rounding form every year. Thank you for listening. Matt-san will take over from here. よろしくお願いします。
はい、わかりました。If you can just bring up the survey results. So we did send out the survey on GIA to all of our chapters. As of this morning, when I checked, we have 19 responses out of our 27, 28. So I just want to talk about those briefly today and get a chance to get any feedback from any of you on this idea of pushing the GIA process up somewhat. Next slide, please. So in the questions we asked, asking first how you feel about the current schedule. You can see 10.5% feel it's a little early. 47.4% report that it's just right, and 42.1% report that it's late. Now this is interesting, and I'll talk about this in a minute once we do the other results. Next slide, please. Nope. What happened to 2? Or is this off? So asking what would happen if we moved it up, good idea, no opinion, bad idea. You can see the majority feel this is a good idea. However, there is a significant percentage that feels, that have no opinion, and a smaller group that feels it's a bad idea. This was interesting to me because we had a lot of chapters say the current schedule is fine, but then we also had many who feel it would be a good idea to push that up somewhat. Next chapter, please, or next slide, please. And paper receipts. This was no surprise, except that there were some respondents who, I'm sorry, GIA stands for grant and aid. I just saw the chat. Most people feel paper receipts are very troublesome. We've understood this. This reaffirms our understanding. Some people don't seem to be particularly bothered, and 1 or 2 even felt that it was no problem at all. But generally, we recognize the issue here. So just to get this out of the way first, and I think as some of you may know, we have discussed this with CLAIR Tokyo about doing away with the requirement that you submit the original actual paper receipts. CLAIR Tokyo considered that and said, no, we want them. So I think what happens, I have to check with my colleagues, we'll have to discuss this, whether we can go back and try to have this discussion again. If it were up to JLGC New York alone, we would not impose this on you. But it is the CLAIR policy. So at least for the moment, we're stuck with it. But we will continue to work on this. And we really appreciate your feedback, confirming that and giving us some really solid reasons for why this is a pain in the tuchus for you. All right, so the survey results in general about the GIA schedule. So this really confirmed the concerns that we had that this could be difficult for at least some of the chapters, especially in terms of your officers being ready to start this process earlier than you already are. But it also showed us that many chapters are willing to adjust to this schedule and work with it. So, if we do implement it. For the chapters that feel that this is going to be extremely difficult for you because your new officers are coming in usually in April and would not have time to learn the job before they begin the application process, and for chapters that really don't begin their planning process until the new officers are settled in and start working on it. One thing I'd like to propose, and we really haven't worked out details of how this would actually function, but that we hold our CLAIR GIA seminar, the webinar, which we've done for the last 3 years now. I think it was a fantastic innovation. I wish we had thought of this years ago. This is another one where Tomoko Fujiwara really stepped in and came up with a fantastic idea to do this. We can do that anytime, and we really should be doing it in April anyway. This should be done as soon as possible in this process. We've done these at NatCon since the beginning because national conferences used to be held generally for the US in June or July. It was early in the process. It was, it worked. And this was the only way we had to communicate with you all being in the same room. Now, clearly, that's not the case. So I really feel we should be holding these webinars much earlier anyway. And if we hold these in mid to late April, and even perhaps integrate them into your officer transitions. So the GIA webinar becomes part of your transition if you are changing treasurers. But also, one thing that I learned at CanCon this year, because we had this discussion at CanCon, speaking with treasurers there, one of their real gripes was GIA is not just the treasurer's issue. It's the event planners, it's the other officers. Everybody is working on what the chapter is going to be doing, and the treasurers don't have a say over a lot of that. So I think one of the other things is that hopefully other officers who are involved in event planning and chapter activities will also become a part of this, this training session, so that we can start this earlier for the chapters and help support your transition process so that GIA is better understood by everybody. Because one thing I was told was, well, only the treasurers pay attention to GIA because everybody feels like it's their duty and nobody else has to worry about it, which I'm told and I can see is not the case. So we would have to ask some chapters to perhaps adjust their election schedules or their onboarding schedules. We could conceivably shift this just a little later, like late April, early May, conceivably, but much beyond that, it loses meaning. So we would like to work on that idea and have more feedback from you. And this is still an ongoing discussion. Today is a chance to talk about it a little bit. Nothing is decided. We would still like to have your input. And I would especially like to talk to the chapters that really feel uncomfortable with this idea and see if we can work out ways to make this work. Because I think it's pretty clear, even though a lot of chapters are okay with the current process, I think the vast majority feels that this would help them in various ways. So that's really, and then perhaps the idea that we do this for a year or two is, on a trial basis, and we'll reevaluate it as we go forward. But I really hope that we can try to make this transition and improve the GIA process. So any questions, comments, complaints? Jim Gannon, no personal attacks whatsoever from you. I see your face there. Anybody, please.
Hey, Matt, I just wanted to understand before we start discussion on what works for us.
Yep.
Can you help us understand the timeline that CLAIR needs to follow and what happens on the CLAIR side if we're late in submitting, just so that we have a really solid foundation to discuss from?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Part of our discussions internally was, and my question to Madi and the rest of the JET team was, can we do this? Does this work for all of you? Because I don't handle GIA, honestly. I would be, putting this on my colleagues who do. We can start in March, basically. We're supposed to start in March anyway by starting to reach out to the chapters and get ready for the next fiscal year. So for us, we can do this schedule. And it would be good actually for us to build this into our planning because frankly, this year the webinar was done late. It wasn't built into the planning. had to go back and remind people that we should do this. So I think it would be good for us, and it's doable. If chapters are applying late, that's always been somewhat of an issue. It used to be more of an issue for various reasons I won't go into. My understanding is we can deal with late submissions, but it makes it difficult because we need to decide what we can allocate to each chapter. And if we don't know what some of the chapters are going to be asking for, it really makes it difficult to allocate resources as effectively as possible to all the other chapters. So in the old days, we had to have everybody's submission, and then we sent that as a block to CLAIR Tokyo for final approval, and we couldn't send it until we had everybody. Now it's more a matter of being able to give as much as we can to each chapter, knowing what we're working with. Anything? I see you thinking, Jim. Don't even think about it. Anybody? I mean, I'm happy to try to answer any questions, or anything on GIA, frankly, too. Not just the schedule thing, but any other issues. I saw the questions about accommodations funding for NatCons and things. Any of that stuff is good.
I have a comment.
Okay.
Maybe kind of a question, and I'm not sure if this is like feasible with the timeline, but I know in my chapter's case in April, I was a new president and we had a new treasurer, and we definitely needed that kind of 2 or 3 months to kind of get our bearings and learn the process and submit our application. But I'm really hoping that next year we don't have as much turnover. I hope the treasurer stays on. I hope I stay on as president. And I mean, I could see us being ready to submit our GIA like in April, and it would be great to get approved and the money like sooner than September, so that we can move forward. So I think some of it kind of depends on like where you are as a chapter, what kind of year you have coming up, like how much officer turnover there is. And so I don't even know if that's feasible to have kind of the option of submitting it for some chapters that are ready to submit it early and getting their GIA funding approved and getting it in their bank account relatively early in the year, so they can start holding some of those events. But then for some of the chapters who kind of need a couple of extra months just kind of get their bearing, giving them that kind of time to kind of figure things out. But like you said, it seems like you kind of want to have all the chapters kind of submit at the same time and have it all approved at the same time. But
yeah, thanks for the comment, and that's a great question, David. And I was actually just thinking about that as looking at the results today and thinking, well, could we give, for those chapters that really struggle, could we give them more time? But like I said, for the reasons I gave, that's difficult. It may not be impossible, but there could be, some ramifications from that in terms of what we're able to supply for those remaining chapters. But that is something that we will continue to look at, I think. Hopefully we can help, make this, okay, this is the way it is. Let's do everything we can to help every chapter be able to do this with the least pain possible, is kind of what I'm looking at, though. Somebody had a raised hand, so.
I think that's me. I just wanted to make a comment that I know some chapters don't have much of a reserve in terms of funds, and some chapters do. My chapter happens to be one of the lucky ones. And so I think it may be reasonable for me to put it out there that knowing that we have funds in reserve, that we can start our year before fully going through GIA, it would make sense that those who don't have those funds maybe get first go to help get their system started, to get off of the train on the tracks and moving. But that's just an idea, and you'd want to talk about this more.
That's a really interesting point. We don't know who those chapters are, frankly, necessarily, because Mari-san can correct me, but we don't really gather information on all of your finances. We want to know CLAIR funding and MOFA funding, and we're asking if you have other funding for events. But we don't necessarily, I think, know what your bank accounts are, what your reserves are. So that
Let
could be
me
a little difficult.
clarify. I would volunteer like a sign off to say, I don't need these funds right away. And that can be done as early as the middle of April, because the new treasurer coming in or me continuing would be able to look at the bank account and say that.
Well, I don't think you can think about that. I mean, but I don't think it's an issue. If you can do the paperwork, it's not really an issue, to get funds to you soon. But for a chapter, I mean, and frankly, for the chapters that feel that this would be extremely difficult, I mean, one of the results of that, though, is they're going to have to wait longer, as you all have been, to get funds if we don't shift this. And I think a lot of those conditions apply for everybody, that you're working for months without, a reserve, or you're working without the funds for these events, and you have to carry those costs. So in that way, too, it could be a painful transition, but everybody would be able to have access to our funding for them much sooner. And I hope that it would alleviate issues that you may be having in that area to help make up for any issues with adjusting your officer, transition schedules.
I wanted to step in, Matt, really quick and do a little bit of centering, because I think there are some people who have never done the GIA process in the audience, whether that's personally or you're not a leader and haven't had the opportunity, or you're just not the treasurer. So
I've never done the GIA process, so I'm one of them. Yes.
The GIA process involves creating an activity report of activities that you think that you're going to want to do in the next year, and indicating how much money that you're going to need for that, and then submitting it to CLAIR. CLAIR is going to review those activities and determine whether or not they're going to permit you the money for those activities. There's generally a little bit of back and forth of, well, we can pay for this, but we can't pay for that. Can you please make some changes, right? Before they are then able to say, yes, we approve these activities. And then, we are approving a certain amount, and we will send that into your bank accounts. And at the end of the process, or rather, Matt had mentioned, and it was kind of a passing comment, but this is very important, that there's a bucket of money that CLAIR has. That is the JETAA USA bucket of money, and it's a finite amount. I'm just going to grab $10,000 out of the air. So they have $10,000 that they can divide among all of the chapters. So if they don't get GIA requests from all of the chapters, they cannot make their final decision. So in terms of like some chapters submitting their stuff earlier than later, I think that might be a little bit of a logistical challenge for them, and we're all kind of going to have to wait on those later chapters. The other element that I want to throw out here, and Matt, I have a kind of a question to you in terms of timeline. I'm very timeline driven. When we say April, what does that mean, right? And, I'm hearing that we want to do towards the end of April, a training session. So we're not saying that your GIA is due at the end of April. We're saying that CLAIR will have a training session at the end of April. And then Matt, the question to you is, when is the proposal for when the GIA paperwork would actually be due if we're doing a training session in April? And the final thought before I shut up is, think about the activities that you're doing to recenter yourselves, whether you're a returning officer or that you're doing to onboard a new officer during those first couple of months. And could the activity of sitting down and talking to one another to figure out what activities you want to do in the coming year be a productive part of that, rather than something that is separate from your onboarding? So Matt made an excellent point that GIA training can be part of your onboarding and is well timed in that first month or two if your officer transition is coming in April. And personally, as a chapter leader, I found it very centering for us to sit down in April and May and start talking about what activities we wanted to do. Your fiscal year is April to March. So if you're waiting until June or July to talk about what activities you want to do, half the year is already gone, yeah? And then we can't do any events in March because it's time to turn in our paperwork. So that gives us a lot of work to happen in a very short period of time. I'm done now. Sorry, Matt.
No. That's great. Thank you. And that's really the thing. I know that we used to have you submitting your final stuff by early March. We've had to push that into February because we were having so many late submissions, and our second years are heading back to Japan in usually mid to late March. And if they were handling GIA, that's a disaster for them and everybody. So, right, that does pretty much, except for, 311 commemorative events, which we tend to handle, a little specially. March is pretty much taken out of the picture now. So, right, getting started in April. And as Megan said, though, we're starting, we're doing the webinar, we're starting the process somewhere mid to late April. Then you've got the, 6 or 8 weeks, whatever, we give to actually fill things out and make your decisions and do the planning. And, if chapters can get in sooner rather than later, that's wonderful. But it does sort of expand that time for the chapter to consider events. So, hopefully that also would be an improvement for everybody. Let's see, anything. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff in the chat. I'm having trouble following it, honestly. So if anybody, feel free to pull up points. Jim, yes.
Thank you. First, Takahashi-san and Matt, that was a really fascinating presentation, and I learned a lot from it. Having gone through the GIA process a few times, I'm still learning here. Two questions, or one question, one comment. Just when you look back over time, and I know you're the institutional memory there, Matt, but in the last 10 years, has the overall GIA budget that you're handling out of North America, has that increased, decreased, stayed the same? Just be curious what the overall trends are. And second, I think you've seen the chats that really the requirement to submit the paper receipts is challenging. I'm sitting here with a stack of them that I'm in New York. I have to somehow physically bring these to Washington, D.C., then gather up more receipts and then make sure they get back up to New York. And I know it's even harder for the smaller chapters like Texoma was talking about. So anything you can do to encourage your Tokyo colleagues, to let them know that this is a strong wish on the US side would be great. And I know the rest of the Japanese government and Haro Kono are moving towards this digitalization. So if you can use this as an excuse to go back, we'd be delighted.
Yeah, let's got some on the receipts. Yeah, sorry about that. Budgets, I don't tend to see the numbers. My impression is that CLAIR has been able to hold our GIA funding fairly steady. And of course, I think everybody understands there's a lot of pressure on our budgets. Of course, CLAIR underwent a lot of budget cutting back in the jet threat days, just as a government, quasi-government agency. But they have managed to hold the line so far. That said, and as I think a lot of you know, there are no promises. Or we really, I certainly have no idea what happens in the next fiscal year, and I don't think even my colleagues higher up could give you any assurance of what happens in the next fiscal year, the one after that. So all of the discussions, in the last couple of days about preparing for difficult eventualities hold true. But my colleagues at CLAIR, to their credit, top to bottom, have done everything they can to hold the line to be able to support JETAA, and we'll continue to do everything we can. We'll continue to try to get them to modernize, up closer to the 21st century on some of these things. Anything else?
I have a quick question. Hi. I'm wondering, this is because I work with a lot of privacy laws in my job. What does CLAIR and, what do you all do with those lists of our memberships, those names and emails? I'm just a little concerned sending them via email every year. And like, if I get hacked, if you get hacked, everyone's emails are out there. Also for chapters, we should also be informing our members that we are sharing this information if it is a necessary thing to do, just because, you know, they might have reasons why they don't want their name sent on a spreadsheet. So if you could enlighten us a little bit more or help me figure out what to tell my people, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and a great question. Thank you. Basically, in my experience, your membership lists get printed out, put in a binder, and sit on a shelf. They do exist in soft form somewhere, and if we need to discuss encryption, if you haven't already, that's certainly an issue that we should consider. The membership lists don't go beyond our office. And if you're collecting names, if you need to, then that, you know, the people signing up should be informed of where their information is going, and where it is going is to CLAIR, New York. And these days, it doesn't even necessarily go to CLAIR, Tokyo. But they do go into our records. We originally collected your membership list because your grant and aid was per capita. So each chapter received a set amount per member. And that then, of course, you know, required us to know how many members you had. There are obvious issues with that. And we did away with that system, but we still like to have a gauge of how healthy your chapter is, how big it is. We also use, well, we can't really use that list. And any of you, JETAA especially, knows that in the times that we are looking for members from a certain chapter for something. You know, the governor of Hiroshima is visiting Hawaii. Can Hawaii provide some alumni who can, you know, meet with the governor, support that mission? We have to reach out to the Hawaii chapter for them to give us that information. So we don't pull that from the lists they send us for GIA. And that's true for pretty much anything we would ask a chapter for. So we're not even really using that data for things that, you know, we could internally. You know, I would, again, have to discuss with my colleagues exactly what happens with this or how it's protected. But really, it comes to us and it's filed away. And I'm not sure, I mean, there's standard protections on that, but you know, we're a Japanese government office, so we are not exactly, you know, cutting edge, you know, technology here. So. And again, you know, if this is something I'd be happy, you know, if you want to contact me, you know, we can continue to discuss this and any other chapters that have concerns or opinions on this. I'd be happy to talk to you. Daniel?
Yeah, hi. I was curious about the timeline for rolling out this timeline and what the decision process from here looks like, and when we would get word of this new timeline, and when implementation, the considerations for when implementation would start.
Yeah, that's a very good question. We're looking at this to implement from next year, if possible. So we, you know, this is basically sort of the later phase of trying to get input from all of you and find out how you feel about it. But with this, we should be able to then hopefully decide to try this next year at least. And then we will let you know about that as soon as we can hopefully in the next few weeks, so that, you know, you can all be prepared as we roll into next year, you know, that we will be trying to, you know, give this a test run at least.
Okay, yeah, I asked because we are one of the chapters who hold our elections a little later, maybe than most. And so that would have a pretty impactful effect on us if this new timeline were to take effect starting next year. So yeah, as much advance notice as possible would be very appreciated.
Well, when are your elections, if I may ask?
I think we hold our elections in March and April. And then we meet with our board in May, our new board in May.
Okay. Yeah, honestly, if it's possible to push that even February, March, rather than March, April, that would be helpful in this process, for us, certainly.
Right, and so I just wanted to point out that like we would need to know as soon as possible so that we can move up those timelines.
Yeah, I would hope that we can reach a decision on this fairly shortly after, after NatCon, and we've had a chance to discuss this in the office. And preferably before I leave for Tokyo in 3 weeks, so that we have time to get it out to you. But yeah, most chapters have adjusted their timelines more to fit the fiscal year, so officers take their post by April 1st. And I think that's proven to be good. Back in the day, everybody had their elections whenever, and it was just a free for all. But yeah, I would at least tentatively, and I'm sure you are, start considering what it would take for you to shift your elections just a little bit earlier. And like I said, we will try to let you know as soon as we can. And I don't imagine that we'll just announce something, that we want to have one last, chance for input from everybody once we have a definite proposal to give to you.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So that brings us to toward the end of the session. Matt or Takahashi-san, do you have any closing remarks?
Madi, do you have any closing remarks? Or? No? I'll just say thank you to everybody. We always appreciate your staying awake through the funding presentation. And this was a really great discussion on the proposed changes to the schedule. I'm very grateful for all of the wonderful input, and we will get back to you just as soon as we've had a chance to discuss this in the office and let you know what we would like to do for next steps. So thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, well, thank you. And these slides will be shared with everyone. The room will remain open